Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to crack open the corporate playbook to figure out one of the most critical questions in business. How do companies decide where to invest millions or even billions of dollars?
So imagine this. You've got $1 million to invest. Project A gets your money back to you super fast. Project B, well, it takes longer, but it promises to make you way more money overall. What do? It's a classic dilemma, right? This is the core challenge of capital budgeting, and honestly, getting this right can make or break a company.
So here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with that big question, look at some simple tools, and see why they don't quite cut it. Then we'll meet the two heavyweights of finance, watch them go head-to-head, declare a winner, and then wrap it all up with a final dose of reality. Okay, let's jump right in. Think about it. Every single day, companies from tiny startups to massive global corporations have to answer these huge billion-dollar questions. Should we build that new factory? Should we launch this new product? Do we invest in that new tech? And, there's a name for this whole process. It's called capital budgeting. But it's not just about, writing checks. It's about being super strategic, making sure every single dollar you invest is going to grow the company's value. The stakes are, well, they're incredibly high. So where do you even begin with a decision this big? Well, you'd probably start with something simple, right? Something intuitive. And these tools are really easy to grasp, but as we're about to find out, they each have a huge blind spot. So you've got two main contenders in the simple category. First, there's the accounting rate of return, or ARR, which basically just asks, how profitable is this thing on average? Then you've got the payback period, which is all about speed. How fast do I get my initial cash back? And they both sound pretty logical, don't they? Profit and speed. What more could you need? Well, turns out they're missing something massive.
And that massive something is one of the most important ideas in all of finance, the time value of money. Think about it. $1 in your hand right now is worth more than the same dollar promised to you next year. You can invest it, it can earn interest, it just has more power today. And those two simple methods we just talked about, they totally ignore this fundamental truth. And in finance, that's a fatal flaw.
So, to fix this huge problem, we have to bring in the big guns. We're talking about discounted cash flow methods, or DCF. These are the heavyweights for a reason. They get the time value of money. So let's meet our two champions. In this corner, net present value, or NPV. And in the other corner, the internal rate of return, or IRR. And listen, this isn't just some dusty textbook theory. A big survey asked CFOs, the top finance bosses at major US companies, what tools they actually use. And guess what? 76% use IRR and 75% use NPV. These are the real deal tools that drive decision-making in the corporate world. All right, first up is NPV, net present value. I like to think of NPV as the straight shooter, the pragmatist. It asks a really simple question. If we do this project, how much richer in today's dollars will the company be? It takes all the money you think you're going to make, pulls it back to what it's worth today, and subtracts your initial cost. The result is one number, a dollar amount. If it's positive, you're good to go. Then you've got IRR, the internal rate of return. If NPV is the pragmatist, IRR is kind of like the enthusiastic salesperson. It doesn't talk in dollar amounts. It talks in percentages. It tells you the project's built-in inherent rate of return. And the rule is easy. If that percentage is higher than what it costs you to borrow money, it's a thumbs up. Now here's where it gets really interesting. If you're just looking at one project, a simple, should we do this or not? NPV and IRR will almost always point you in the same direction. But what happens when you have two great projects, but you only have the budget for one? This is where the fight really begins. Okay, take a look at this. This lays out the conflict perfectly. You've got Project 10 with an incredible IRR of 30%. That's way better than Project 9's 20%. So IRR is basically shouting, pick Project 10, it's the better return. But hold on, look at the NPV. Project 9 actually adds more cash to the company's bottom line, $282 versus $204. So NPV is saying, whoa, forget the flashy percentage. Pick me, I'll make us more money. So, what do? Which one do you trust? This is quite literally the million-dollar question for so many companies. Do you chase the higher percentage, or do you go for the bigger pile of cash? Making the wrong call here means you are actively choosing to be less wealthy. You're leaving real money on the table. All right, so how do we settle this debate once and for all? Well, we've got to pop the hood and look at the engine of each method.
It turns out this whole disagreement comes down to one single hidden assumption that each one makes about what happens next.
And this is it. This is the core of the conflict. It's all about what you assume you're going to do with the cash the project generates each year. IRR assumes you can take that cash and find another project that also earns that same amazing 30% return, which, let's be honest, is pretty optimistic. NPV, on the other hand, makes a much more grounded assumption. It assumes you'll just reinvest that cash at your company's regular everyday rate of return. Much more realistic, right?
And because of that more realistic assumption, and because a company's goal is to maximize the total amount of value, finance theory declares a clear winner. It's NPV. At the end of the day, the goal isn't to get a high five for a great percentage. It's to increase the actual value of the firm. And NPV is the only one of the two that directly measures that. It tells you the dollar amount you're adding to the pot. So there we have it. NPV is the champion. Case closed, right? Well, not so fast. There's been a giant elephant in the room this whole time. Every single one of these calculations is built on one massive assumption, that we can perfectly predict the future.
And of course, in the real world, that's just not how it works. The future is messy, it's uncertain. You think you know what your sales will be, but what if a competitor comes out of nowhere? All of that uncertainty, that's risk. And any truly smart financial decision has to wrestle with it.
So how do the pros handle this? Well, there are two main ways to bake risk into your thinking. First, you can adjust the discount rate. Basically, you say, hey, this project is pretty risky, so I'm going to demand a higher rate of return for it. That higher hurdle rate automatically lowers the NPV. The other way is to adjust the cash flows themselves. It's like saying, okay, my best guess is we'll make $100, but to be safe, what's a number I feel absolutely certain we can hit? Maybe $80. Then you run your numbers using that more conservative, sure thing cash flow.
And that really brings us to our big takeaway. Yeah, we've established that NPV is the better formula for maximizing value. But the real art of management isn't just plugging numbers into a formula. It's about navigating the uncertainty around those numbers. So the ultimate question becomes this: how much is it worth to a company to turn an uncertain guess into a confident bet? And that, well, that's a question no formula can ever answer alone.